from your shop, and it means a lot to me. A big thanks also to Cloud Hands Press and its founder, Tim Horwitz, who also made this possible. And of course to Mary, who I'm so grateful for you to be here. I've known Mary for 10 years. Really our first interaction was in the Reuters Chicago newsroom, where Mary was my mentor, but also my hard-nosed editor who used to torture me over my stories and help me along. So it means a lot to me for you to be here as well. Thank you.
Torture you? I gave one little tip about commas, I think.
Use them, they're free.
Right. That's the one.
Right.
And something about the length of your lead, like.
Well, that was one of the more terrifying ones. You said to me, I think it was like my first story I ever wrote at Reuters, and you read it and you're like, it's good, thank you, but if your lead is ever longer than 35 words, I'm gonna kill you.
Something like that.
Yeah, but it was in jest. Someone, I think your editor, when you were a Cub reporter, actually said the same thing. So no, Mary's a wonderful, kind-hearted person who's taught me so much, and actually provided instrumental feedback on the final drafts of my novel, along with East Coast book editor Victoria Stahl. And Mary is just one of the best journalists I've ever worked with and know, and one of the best book editors. And so, that support was instrumental.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Eric. And congratulations on this book. When I first read this book, I'm like, I was like, Bones from Star Trek, like, damn it, Eric, you're a reporter, not an investment banker. Where's all this stuff coming from? This is a really deep dive into a very strange and toxic world. And it really, you describe in this book how people are changed and shaped by this environment. And I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about, you got into it a little bit with Susie, but a little bit about this environment, what you were doing there, and the kind of personalities that you found there, and how you were able to translate that into this book.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, before making a mistake and going into the wrong profession, I was, editor-chief of my paper. I worked in the Guardian's on the Guardian Sunday paper in London. And so I had this sort of journalistic training. And then, for various reasons, basically, you're thinking about economic security, you're thinking about money, and, what kind of career you're going to have. Maybe you do this career for 10 years, and then that allows you to follow your passions. And so, yeah, I went into banking, spent a year in Chicago doing it, and, learned a lot. But I actually, took the journalistic approach. So I actually had an electronic notebook where I was like typing quotes and little observations of things people said and did. And eventually, I became disillusioned with that world pretty quickly. And there was one particular, I was trying to remember, like, what was the one thing that got me to leave the profession? And I was actually in my cubicle. I got a call from a friend, a college guy I played soccer with in college, and he said, another teammate of ours died in a freak accident. Like, it was out of nowhere, one of these crazy things that happens. And the guy in the next cubicle overheard the conversation and asked me about it. And I kind of said what happened, and the guy just started laughing, and he was like, "Oh, what an idiot," kind of thing. And so I actually took a yellow legal pad, went down to a bar on the Chicago River, and wrote out what became one of the first scenes of one of the associates coming into the bank at about 7 a.m. and walking in on bail, sleeping in his cubicle after yet another all-nighter. And so, the bottom line is, it was just, you draw in real life, right? It's based on real characters and real experiences, but kind of like how Martin Amis describes, even if you start with something real in your book as the basis of your book, once the plot acts on it, once the characters act on it, once you get into it, it becomes its own thing. It takes on a life of its own. And so that was the inspiration.
Okay, well, this is a very, very toxic environment. Like, whoa, some of the things that these people say. One of the things that that's difficult in building a world like this is you have to, the book is called "Whenever a Happy Thing Falls," which is a quote from a poem, right?
Right, Rilke poem. Yep, the Diana Elegies.
And in order to have something fall, it has to start from somewhere. It has to start from someplace, a place of grace. And that's something that you, without giving too many things away, that's something that you build into this book. And I was wondering how you got there. How were you able to build sympathy for not just your main character, but for other characters in the book, where you kind of see where they're coming from, you kind of see how they got where they are. What was the process like for that?
I mean, that was one of the most challenging things, right? Because I wanted to show real life. I didn't want to romanticize Wall Street. I also didn't want to necessarily do an expose. I wanted to be true to the story. And so basically, Bale is, he's a recent college graduate. It's a coming of age story. And he's forced to take this job at this bank and give up a relationship with the girl of his dreams, a precocious young actress, by his father, who has an ulterior motive, and he's sort of obsessed with his son's material success. And then he's plunged into this toxic culture, 100-hour work weeks, racism, misogyny, obscene materialism. And he is really pressured by competing things. So on the one hand, he wants to, he's going to give it a shot, right? He's acquiesced to his father's demands. He's going into the bank. The bank is run by a family friend, essentially. And so he wants to fit in a way, but he's also almost immediately disillusioned by these, as you point out, these horrific things that these bankers are saying. And so the reader is taken on a journey of him pushing back on this in an increasingly big way. And so in the beginning, someone makes a crack about, a sexist remark, and he rolls his eyes. And then fast forward a little bit, and he's actually verbally confronting his boss and saying, don't say that. And then, it builds and builds and builds, and the tension simmers and simmers and simmers as all these bankers and the work hours and everything just acts on each other until he has to figure out a way, literally, to extract himself from this culture, to not become one of them, and then also chart out a way of how is he going to go forward, who's he going to be, and how can he ultimately save his own life. And so I can read a little.
Yeah, that's what I was just about to ask you, if you can.
Yeah,
from that world, so we can go there and
and so
taste the sweat.
That's right, and also, and as far as pushing back, there's ways apart from pushing back on the bankers. There's times where he has sympathy. And it's a big part of the plot, so I don't want to give away, but he has sympathy for a homeless man that's nearby the office, and sympathy for one of the only female colleague in the M&A bullpen who is getting underpaid by the bank and doing analyst work. And so these things all come together at the end in a way I don't really want to go too much further.
But take us there.
Yeah. So, okay. So the scene I'm going to read here is it's 1:30 in the morning. He's been, at the office for just days on end, and he's binding pitch books with his boss, an associate named McAllister. The 15 books were collated, bound, stacked, shimmering in the glare of corporate fluorescent lighting. They both stood there, McAllister and Bale, with their arms wrapped around their chests, looking at their creation. "All right," McAllister said, "let's go through them." Bale grabbed a stack and plopped them on the filing cabinet. McAllister stared at the larger pile of remaining books and grew irate over his assumption that Bale was slyly trying to offload work on a higher-ranking associate. "Don't be a Jew," McAllister said, grabbing the remaining books and dumping them on Bale's pile. "What the F, man?" Bale said. "What the F what?" McAllister said, reaching for the pile. Without thinking, Bale swiped McAllister's arm away from the pile, saying, "Why the F are you saying racist SHIT to me?" McAllister shoved his arm down and stepped an inch from Bale's face. Bale shoved him back, but McAllister quickly grabbed 2 fistfuls of Bale's shirt and flung him against the filing cabinet, causing a green potted plant to fall and shatter on the carpeting. They clawed at each other, veins jumping out over their ruby skulls as they flailed and cursed and spit. McAllister swung Bale into another cabinet, which he slammed into, tearing his shirt from nape to waist. Both McAllister and Bale's eyes grew wide at the gashing sound, and they instantly stopped fighting. McAllister rested his palms on his knees, panting as Bale grappled with the back of his shirt to appraise the damage. Both took seats on the carpet beside each other. McAllister leaned his skull against the cabinet. Bale cracked his knuckles. They both knew the fight was about far more than the slur. The difference was that McAllister didn't care. For Bale, in that moment, it seemed as if all of American life boils down to an endless war between spitefully evil bastards and those trying to marginally disrupt their influence.
Okay, thank you. That's a great scene because it's so ridiculous that they're grown people are doing this, and it's over a worthless thing.
Right, totally.
Describe this. This is something that people get at conferences and they throw it away.
Right, totally. And yeah, exactly. A leave behind. No, and that's the thing is, readers will see in the book. I mean, I didn't get in any fistfights in the office. My life didn't go off the rails as badly as Bale's did. But it's this sort of tension that I think hopefully draws people in, and this sort of trajectory of him that hopefully you start rooting for him along the way. But back to your point in the beginning, readers might go, well, is he going to be one of them? And that's one of the things I personally really like in books where people are nuanced, right? Characters are nuanced, they're rounded. It's not always so simple as, well, this person's a good person, this person's a bad person. And so I kind of like when you get a character and you might not know what happens. You got to follow it.
Well, one of the things that I thought was really fascinating about this is how much the lack of sleep plays into this lifestyle, and how they make these immense salaries and they can't enjoy it at all because they're so, they buy this, expensive bland furniture that they never get to see because they're never at home. Right. They have these kind of bland, expensive women that they never get to see because they're never at home. I would assume that some of them are probably nice. But they're because they're so wrapped up in each other. It's kind of a military lifestyle. And I wondered, what is this, and I think that it's interesting that you draw a comparison in the book between, this Chicago, Board of Trade, LaSalle Street, point of view, and academic life and journalistic life in England. And I wondered if you think that this lifestyle is uniquely American, or is it just uniquely about money?
That's a really great question. I mean, I think we kind of talked about this a little bit of, a Chicago book. Mm-hmm. And, as I mentioned to Susie, I mean, Chicago's in my DNA, right? So the concept of like people being obsessed with making a bunch of money, banking's a global industry. It's not really that, but what makes it a uniquely Chicago book is these sort of themes that, are present in a lot of Chicago literature, this sort of, importance of architecture and concrete and steel and the melting pot of people. And, Bale is, during the day, he might be with, a super wealthy and powerful investment banker. And then at night, he's with cab drivers and friends, and he's out in the streets. And there's, readers will recognize places, Old Town Ale House, of course, East Bank Club, where he sees former President Obama driving to the hoop. So, Chicago's in my DNA. And I wrote the first draft of it actually in Zagreb, Croatia, where Margot, my wife, and I moved, and came back to the States and finished it in Seattle. All right. But it's always been about Chicago. It had to be about Chicago. And I wondered also, and Mary, I mean, you're an expert in Chicago literature. I mean, does that resonate with you, what I'm saying?
Well, yeah, because so much of Chicago literature is about the person who doesn't belong. You find that in Sister Carrie. You find that in Algren's books. You find that Frank is somebody who wants to be something more than what he is, and he's continually ground down by his environment. The same thing happens with Sister Carrie. And that's actually a theme in all of American literature. All of American, because we have this, one side we have the American dream and people wanting to get where they're going and be on top. But all of American literature is about the guy or the girl who says, well, what if I don't? Algren points out that Chicago's slogan, but he says, there's always people in Chicago who are asking, well, what if I can't? There's this pull and there's this tug. And, it's one of the things that your book reminded me of is, besides other examples of Chicago literature, was the story Bartleby the Scrivener by Herman Melville, where there's a guy who's in an office and suddenly he just starts saying, I'd prefer not to.
Right.
Every time he's asked to
Oh, and by the way, I have, if you prefer not to be in office, you should quit your job the way I did, the way I quit banking. I threw my bank issued phone into the Chicago River, marched right into the office of the head of M&A at the bank I worked at, and just said, "I'm done. I'm out. Thanks for everything." And yeah, you should try to go out like that.
The poor Chicago River. I have heard several stories about people throwing their phones or their pages into the Chicago River. There's probably a little sedimentary pile down there of electronic devices. But I think, that it does tie into, the thing about Chicago is that there's always pulls and tugs in Chicago. There's the sense of intimacy and there's the sense of being totally alienated. There's the sense of being, a grifter and on the side of the devils like Al Capone, and being on the side of the angels like, like Jane Addams. And there's always, between those people who are on the make, as Bale is, and as, his companions are, and the people who are trying to change things, trying to make a difference. And you feel that tug in Bale throughout the book. And so that makes him part of this Chicago literary tradition. So,
yeah. I was going to read just a part about Chicago to show how important it was. But, it was hard to find, excerpts to read from the book because there's so many swear words. So I'm going to keep it all brief then. Okay.
Yeah, you didn't spell it out in the book like you did when you read it.
Yeah, no, I should. Yeah, I'm trying to not, offend too many people at once. So I'm gonna try to temper that. So this very brief vignette here is Bale's been at the office, which is in the Willis Tower, also known as the Sears Tower, and he's been there for hours and hours and hours. And every morning, if he sleeps overnight at the office, he goes down and recaffeinates. And so, you take multiple elevators to get down to the lobby. And so he stops and he sort of presses himself against the glass and he's looking out on Chicago. So he saw Lakeshore Drive winding like a skinny estuary along the Lake Michigan beach, and the cars' lights bleeding together like currents, and silver cars changing lanes like shimmering salmon. Then the ill-colored beach and the water spreading out like a hulking blue mirror materializing from the smoky horizon, whose whimsical spectrum burned around the sun, a keyhole into hell.
That's how it looks when you want to. And what also it suggests is that the character wants to be there, wants to be down where the things are, and he's kind of up here in this high rise, working on things that don't matter. There's some questions coming in from the audience. One is, I thought, a good one. How long had you been writing this? What was the process? I mean, you have a full-time job, kids, all sorts of things going on. How did you do this?
Yeah, no, it definitely, the writing process takes perseverance, especially if it's a novel. But, when I moved to Zagreb with Margot, I, devoted every waking minute to getting a draft done. And then, you just have to find time. Then I came back, got a job at Reuters. Everything got very busy. We had 2 kids, and I'm, condensing a long process. But basically, you just have to stick with it. And I would say, like, as far as any advice things I learned, one is if you can work out the structure of the book before you sit down to write, it's obviously going to change. But that gives you the bones, and it just makes the writing process a lot easier. The second thing would be perseverance. And the third thing, the most important thing, is finding a literary genius or geniuses who you trust and look up to help you with your work. And for me, many people gave me feedback on the draft before, but Mary was just instrumental, and Victoria Stahl. And to be able for someone to come as an outsider and read your work, it's a personal story, and just give you honest feedback. I mean, you got to have a thick skin. Mary tore me to shreds on a few things, really helped me flesh out the characters, the plot, and have a green ending, right? A hopeful ending. You're in the trenches with this character for so long, and you're pivoting back and forth. So when he's hiding out in Michigan at the cabin and sort of processing everything that's happened, to when he has a big confrontation with his father, to a nearly catastrophic fishing accident. There's so much that you're going through with him. So you want to get to the end, and you want to have that hopeful resolution, or at least, green ending. So though that's the only thing I would say. And Mary teaches writing, so I'll stop yammering. I mean, Mary, any advice on the writing process that you think people would benefit?
Yeah, definitely. One thing is to keep doing it, do it and do it and do it. And another thing is, yes, to let other people see what you're doing when you're ready, because no matter how much you think there's some things that it can be
Totally.
pointed out to you. I thought I knew a lot about Chicago, and I did all these years of work writing the biography of Nelson Algren. And then when I was done with my draft, I sent it around to lots of people who knew better. And they got to point out, like horrible things I'd gotten wrong, like saying that the White Sox had won the pennant back in the World Series back in the 50s when they only won the pennant. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I all said that.
Right,
so,
right.
That was my dear brother managed to point that out.
Oh, yeah. And Mary, real quick on Algren. So Mary wrote the definitive biography of Nelson Algren. And, when you read that book, it reads like a novel, and it's just mind blowing that you were able to pull that off. How did you do it? How did you do that?
Oh, well, I was not a journalism major. I was an English and a theater major, and I structured it like a play. I imagined it as having a rising and a falling action, and I basically structured it in 3 acts. That it was, the beginnings of Algren's life, what made him who he was, and then the top of his life where he was dating Simone de Beauvoir, and he had just won the first National Book Award for fiction, and he's right there in the top of the Bob's roller coaster looking down on the city and all of creation. And then the blacklist comes along. He's not blacklisted, but many of the people associated with him are blacklisted, and his work starts losing reputation because of of negative feelings about proletarian writing and other issues come up during the 1950s. And then that swoop down, and then because I'm Catholic and I have to put redemption, which actually also happens to fit in with the facts of Algren's life. So that's how I was able to get that structure. And part of the reason that I wrote it that way is because I really hate boring biographies.
Right.
People to read them, and I just don't want it to be and then, which a lot of them are like. But thanks for asking about that. But let's get back. Someone had a good question, Margot. Oh, when writing this, what was one thing new or surprising that you learned about yourself?
Oh, wow. I think we were kind of joking about this before. It's like, so much of what I paint in this world of banking is, it's not a flattering picture, right? But, so the question becomes like, do I regret doing it? And it's like, on the one hand, yeah, I wish I went right into journalism, writing to writing, because that's my passion, right? And but I think that you got to take life as it comes. You got to absorb it. And like honestly, if anyone out there wants to write a book, the first impulse is, oh well, I have to quit my day job and I have to now focus on this. But you draw inspiration from real life. And so I think the banking years gave me that inspiration. So I don't know. Another thing I learned is that I learned a bit about structure. I really like books that pivot back and forth between whether it's just geographies, locations. I'm thinking of Faulkner, As I Lay Dying, different narrators, right? And so my book, it starts where you meet Bale, and he's literally at the nadir of his life. I mean, he's hiding out at his family's house in Michigan. And his friend comes to talk to him as sort of a moral compass and guide and help him figure out how he's going to get his life back on track. And then it pivots back and forth. It goes to the bank where you're in the bullpen with a bunch of guys trying to figure out the high stakes world of finance. But then it pivots to London, and you see Bale before all this. And he's has this flourishing romance with a precocious, beautiful young actress. And they have such a powerful connection, and it's going so well. And he's studying poetry and literature. And you're like, because if I started the book with that, it'd be like, well, that's, there's not a whole lot of drama there, right? So, then the father basically undercuts both of these dreams, right? And reality sets in. They go back to Chicago. She goes to New York. So there's a geographical separation. And then he goes into the banking life. And as he becomes disillusioned and the alcohol use and the drug use mounts and mounts and mounts, he loses her, basically. So then the question becomes, now you have the tension, can he win her back? And actually, I'd love to read just a little segment from their, when they're dating in London. And they're talking about all this. I mean, young people, I remember this, we all do it. We're all trying to plot out our life, our next moves. What's our career going to be? What do we stand for? And what do our parents want, right? Like you talk about this stuff, economic security versus like, your dream job, or how can you get your job? And not every job's a dream job, right? Not every pathway is going to be, your dream, but you might be able to achieve it if you put your mind to it, right? So Meta, which is his girlfriend, she's telling him about this, and she's warning him. She's saying, don't listen to everybody else. Follow your heart. And she's really doing what Rilke did in Letters to a Young Poet. And the question becomes, will Bale heed that advice? So they're at a cafe, and they're having a wonderful dinner and a lovely conversation. Bastard or not, Bruce had always had a pull on his decision-making. Bruce is Bale's father. He was larger than life. He survived the military as a Jew, had a silent command of every room, every relationship, every interaction. What if he was right? Why not do what he said and be a banker for 10 years? Have money socked away in case the wheels come off, a medical disaster struck, a pandemic. And of course, Meta sensed Bale's thoughts on this by studying his eyes and the movements of his face, without him needing to say one word. She drained her vodka. The artist can never be afraid of failure, she says. He must embrace failure like he does all emotion. He must encourage it, taunt it, and make it his own, and then crush it. All artists go crazy because we are constantly forging and kneading and balancing within ourselves the entirety of human experience. But so what? Who gives an F-U-C-K about normalcy or even sanity? I've known you for only 8 weeks, and I don't need to see more to tell you that the only thing you need to do is to give expression to what is inside you in the most honest and direct and uncompromised way you can. After dinner, they walked back over Millennium Bridge towards the tube. When they were halfway across, Bale stopped on the bridge and told her, "It is hard to put into words how strongly I feel about you." And she kissed him. Beyond them, the only noise was the Thames pounding against the columns and shore rock piles and the faintest whisper of a restless, churning London.
Great. She's a treasure. What the
He
hell is
blows
the
it.
matter with
He
you,
blows
Bale? Another question from the that I wanted to ask, but someone else also asked, that did any of your friends or your family influence your characters? And kind of tied in with that, how much of Bale is you, and how much of you is Bale, and how did you work that out when you
It's a
wrote?
question I get a lot. There's no, I mean, it's obvious. When you're a writer, you write what you know, right? That's where you should start. And so I absolutely drew inspiration from, friends, family, the guys I met at the bank. But it diverges wildly. When you read the book, you'll see that if you do know me. I mean, I have a wonderful relationship with my parents. They were nothing but supportive in whatever career I wanted to do, particularly in writing. And of course, it's, I would just say the banking scenes, I mean, these are composites, right? So maybe one of the quotes in the book is a direct quote that somebody said, but in the book, the person who said it's different, right? And so you start with these little snippets of reality, these little colorful anecdotes, these things that happen to you, these impressions, whether it's of Chicago or a scene at a bar or whatever. And then you build the book, and it all takes shape and morphs and becomes its own thing. And it comes to life in a shocking way. And so when I read the book now, I don't see any of anybody in it, but I remember, I'm like, oh, right, that guy said it. And another funny thing is, people ask me that question all the time. I actually called some of the guys I was in finance with, and just to give them a heads up, like, hey, look, this book's dropping, and you might recognize a few things in it, but it's not you. Don't worry, it's not you. And as I said to Mary before, I have tons of friends from the banking world, and I didn't set out to say, all bankers are evil or anything like that. So I think that it's fiction, right? It's a story, and so that's what I was going for. And actually, I'll read the final excerpt just about the characters and about the bankers, because I think you'll sort of see what I mean. So in this scene, Bale is sitting around a conference room, and it's the Monday morning meeting, right? So he's watching the room, and he's looking at the bankers, and he's thinking about their stories. He thought about Escher, his hair like a chunk of cigar ash, his belly like a sack of pennies sagging over his belt buckle. He started the firm with Goldman 15 years ago with his wife's family money and connections. Before, he had slowly climbed the ranks at traditional banks in various actuarial roles. Gum-chomping Goldman, conversely, rose up through the ranks, analyst through vice president at Credit Suisse in New York. Then they asked him to start the Chicago branch. Goldman was someone the junior bankers would naturally strive, kill each other to be, with his country club, scratch golf, board appointments, newspaper profiled wine cellar, yacht, and blood red Porsche. Occasionally, the Chicago of a son of a janitor childhood shined through. This made Goldman mythical. Escher didn't grin at you the way Fredericks or McAllister or even Goldman did, all knowing the work they were assigning was excruciating but necessary, that the competitive rush of hardcore deal-making and its 6-0 payouts was motivation enough to pry one's way into this business and to step without concern over the bleeding bodies of your quote-unquote colleagues. Bale remembered his father had a fierce competitiveness in him that would have put the bankers to shame. It wasn't quite sociopathy, but it was unquenchable. In his pre-fatherhood days, Ruth's attitude came off as confidence rather than misanthropy. At least that's how Ruth, his wife, judged it when they met at a mutual friend's birthday the first summer after college. By the time Bale was old enough to really know him, Bruce was treating even a common business meeting as a zero-sum game, transformed as he aged by an obsession with his own hastening mortality. Outside of work, he'd smash a golf club into a tree if he lost a bet to an old friend.
I gotta admit, Eric, though, I'm calling Meta a treasure. My favorite character in the book was Bale's father, because
Wow.
I thought he was intriguing, and I thought that description of him showed why he was intriguing. That he was in a competition. He was in it to win it, and there was something driving him, and he wanted his son to feel that drive. You want to teach your children to survive, and he wanted to teach his child to survive. And the tension between them, I thought, was really interesting. And I wanted to ask you, and this is a question from the audience as well. Which character did you like writing most?
Oh, wow. That's a tough one. I would say Meta. I mean, it's just she's just a amazing young actress already. She's already launching a stage career, a movie career, and she's wrestling with some of these same things too. Like, where do I live? Who do I listen to? She's got a lot of pressure on them. I mean, I think young people just have a lot of pressure on them in general in the United States to figure things out super quick. And so, I love the advice she gave him. I loved how she stuck with him. And then, I love how he plots out a way to reconnect with her. So I thought that was good. But, I had a blast writing the whole thing, really. It was painful at times, because obviously looking back on it, I didn't like the person I was becoming. I was getting sucked into this culture too much. So there was definitely self-reflection. But yeah, it was fun all around.
All right. Now, another question that we got about related to the writing process. Did you know the ending? Did you know what everyone was going to end, how everyone was going to end up when you wrote it? Is that something that came in the telling?
That's a great question. I would say the thing that I've changed least about the book, the last 30 pages. I knew where it was going and where I wanted it to go. But again, Mary was extremely helpful in fleshing out that stuff, because I had this resolution, and the resolution played out in my head. But she was like, here are all the strands that you have to connect and finish. And once I was done with it, I was just super proud of it. I was like, he charts out a way to have a confrontation with his father. I don't want to go too far into what happens, but but all of these strands and themes come together in a really, really powerful, intense way, in a cathartic way. And so that I didn't change, but a lot of the rest of it changed for sure.
Eric, do you have particular influences in writing was there something, writers that you really admire that you thought influenced you in your writing?
Wow. Well, certainly, the Chicago, I'm thinking David Mamet. There's certainly some Glenn Ross in this book. In the book specifically, you almost have to draw on Bret Easton Ellis, American Psycho. But I would say, like, for me personally, I could, rattle off a bunch of books that mean a lot to me, but the one book that means a lot to me is Joyce's Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. And not because it's necessarily my favorite book, but because that book was the turning point in my own life in becoming a writer. I was a junior in high school, and the teacher I had was the first teacher to really get through to me, English literature teacher. And he basically confronted me and took me to the woodshed. And he was like, listen, you're wasting your own time. You're wasting my time. You're not taking this seriously. And you have something to say. You have a voice. And so that book was the first book I really took on. And then, he opened my eyes to poetry, British poets, and it was, Yeats. And that ignited the love I have for writing and the yearning to want to be a novelist. And very tragically, he died our senior year. Many people on this Zoom call will remember him. And so it sort of gave me that impetus where if I could I do it? And I want to do it. And so that I would say Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man for sure.
That's really cool to hear, because I had the same reaction to the Portrait of the Artist. I read it as a sophomore in high school, and at first I didn't like it.
Right.
And then I kept reading it, and I'm like, can you do this?
right. It's hard. It's a hard book, Good.
Yeah, but it's just so revolutionary. You're either going to hate it or it's going to crack you like an egg.
Totally. Any other books for you, Mary?
Okay, that's one of them. The Great Gatsby is another one. Pretty much all of Dickens. And because when I first read Dickens as a young person, I thought, people don't act like this. These characters are totally exaggerated. And then I became a journalist in Chicago, working at the city news bureau, chasing ambulances and going to the morgue and stuff. Like, no, people are really like
Hildy Johnson, your doppelganger, Ben Hecht.
What's that?
Ben Hecht.
Ben Hecht. Oh gosh. Well, yeah, I do like him a lot. His Girl Friday is probably which based on the front page is probably the reason I ended up getting into journalism at all.
Awesome.
I was just going to teach English. So yeah, definitely him. Definitely Mike Royko, our former columnist here, because of the short sentences and because of the empathy that he showed. I wonder, do you think that when we talk to young people about the writing, and what can you tell them to inspire them? What can you? I think that everyone has a book in them. Because I think that everyone has a very unique perspective on life, and all they have to do is kind of crack through, because everyone comes with their own backstory, everyone comes with their own characters in their lives and their own unique poetic language. And, one of my, you asked about inspirations, of course, Algren is one of them, because when I first encountered The Man with the Golden Arm when I was 19 and was looking for a book about drugs, because that's what you do when you're 19, right? So someone said, read this. This is about drugs. And I'm reading it. And I'm like, this is about the neighborhood my family's from.
Right.
I didn't know we could be literature. I thought we were just a bunch of Polish people. And so that was another one that just kind of, cracked me open, because I realized that, we all have, this unique perspective on life, on our country, on relationships. And so that's why I tell people, please write and find your story.
Absolutely. I mean, I completely agree with that. And I think that, American culture, writing is one of those sort of nebulous careers, right? There's no path for it, right? You could on the one hand go get an MFA and go that route, or on the other hand, you could just do it in your spare time. And so, being a doctor, being a lawyer, these are sort of professions that are sort of charted out, and they're also there's emphasis on, young people are told to do those things, right? If you do those things, you'll have a better life. And so I just think that, young people should know that writing is a career that you can do. And it's a rewarding career. I mean, I cover aerospace for the world's largest news agency. I get to write about Boeing. I get to write about Elon Musk's and rockets and Jeff Bezos and the billionaire space race, and go to air shows, and and Mary too. I mean, you've covered some of the most important stories the last 20 years, and so it's an exciting life. It's a writer's life, and I would just totally encourage people to do it. Write in your spare time, young people. Ask, find a mentor, like literally email a journalist you like, email a writer and say, how'd you do it? Can you give me advice? But it can be done. It can be done if you just stick with it.
Yeah, and and to go ahead and write every day if you can, find a way to write. I think that people are forgetting that they have their own voices that are separate from their kind of pretend voices that they project on Twitter and on Facebook, which is very much a mask.
Right.
And I think people are forgetting about their individual voices. I wanted to ask, about are you working on another book right now? Or have you found now that you've written one that you can, you're going to keep going, or is it too soon to say?
Well, you stole my question for you, because, as journalists, we're both journalists. I wanted to break news. So I was going to ask you, what's your next book? So you go first.
Well, yeah, no, I'm actually working on a project about, I had covered transportation at the Tribune, and one of the things I'm really interested in is how the car has shaped the United States. In good ways and bad, and mostly in bad, including, the ways that, highways and expressways and car traffic have shaped our cities, and how we can dislodge ourselves from that culture. So that's something that I'm researching right now. Whether it turns into a book or just a really long article, we'll see what happens.
That sounds awesome. That's great. Yeah. For me, I mean, I'm just relishing this moment right now. I've got 2 solid ideas for another novel. I've got ideas for a bunch of short stories, but with two wonderful kids keeping me busy, and plenty of stuff to write about with Boeing. They're just lurching from crisis to crisis. I think I'll use my spare time to go fly fishing when I can.
Okay, great. Well, before we wrap up, I was wondering, Eric, if there's one scene in the novel that I was hoping that you would read if we have time, and it's the one about the incident in Ogilvy, and I wondered if you had that handy.
Oh, incident at Ogilvy. Let me
because
see
I think it illustrates so well the disconnection that some of these bankers have from
Right.
the actual world of people.
I'm gonna have to dig that up real quick, Mary.
Is another question from the audience we had is can you read a representative or the book that gives another taste of its tone? And so I was just gonna use my interlocutor's prerogative and ask for a scene that
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I got it here. All right, page 151. So in this scene, Bale is in the bullpen, and there is a hostage situation at Ogilvy train station, and it's all over the headlines and absorbing people, and so he just quickly, sort of instinctively, goes to his boss in the next cubicle over and says, asks him about it. So 3:01 p.m. The Chicago Tribune reported a hostage situation at Ogilvy train station on Madison Avenue, where Fredericks, that's his associate, his boss, caught his train to the suburbs. Bale went to inform him. Fredericks, hostage situation, madman with guns at Ogilvy. Fredericks didn't even nod his head. Yeah, the trains are all backed up. There's a man slaying people in the train station. I think there are a couple dead already. He's holding others hostage inside an emptied out corner bakery. Right, yes, I saw, Fredericks said. Aren't you bothered by this? Bale said. Fredericks stopped typing. He made a quarter turn so Bale could see his pockmarked cheek twitching. Quote, there is always some wacko or fundamentalist shooting or blowing something up, he said. The question is, how will it affect me? Well, in a sense, of course, Bale said that has to be the most basic initial reaction to violence. But don't you care that people are dying? People I never met? Yes. Man, no, I don't. I prefer they didn't, but I can't control anything in my life except my own actions. I just try to put my head down and get on with it. He swiveled around his chair to face Bale. Look, my dad was a road construction worker, paved roads and flagged cars all around Dubuque. One day, a maniac driver mowed down his entire work crew on Route 20. He was the only one that survived. Was away on break, finishing a cigarette. Afterward, he didn't donate blood or move to an ashram in India or even change jobs. He walked in the front door, sat down at dinner and said, "Meatloaf again, Martha?"
Right.
I think that exemplifies what we're talking about pretty well.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, well, this is great. I really, really appreciate, Mary, all the tough questions. I got to say, I was terrified that you were going to be my inquisitor, knowing how you are as a journalist, but it really means a lot to me to have everyone here, all the support. And Susie, of course, thank you so much.
Whoops, you got to unmute, Susie.
Oh, Susie's on mute. Wait.
The world of Zoom.
I just wanted to mention that we do have copies at the bookseller. You can either go to our website or send us an email at words@booksellerinc.com.
Okay, and Eric, can I ask you just one more question?
No, sure.
Yeah, that came up from the audience, and I wanted to ask you it. We just wanted to get in where you can find the book first. But what made you the most nervous, and what made you the happiest about the book coming out this week?
Oh, wow. I have to say, the nerves is like, what's the reception going to be? Are people going to, I really hope that people could relate to it, or at least find the story super compelling and thrilling and sort of like a page turner. It's a very visual book, so I hope people really engaged with it. It was really cool. I got to go on the radio and do, a dozen interviews around the country about it. Reviews are coming in more so, and getting to do these events. So it's kind of like a hodgepodge of emotions, but I'll say that the thing that makes me most proud about it is that the last few pages of the book, I feel like I really accomplished what I wanted to do with it. And I just really hope it resonates with people.
Okay, fantastic. Well, Eric, it's so much fun to talk to you, and Susie, thank you for having this event. I can't wait to be back at the bookseller in person. And folks,
Me too.
you got to buy this book, okay? Because this is, it's great.
Please
and
buy it from the
you'll
bookseller.
probably get through it in an evening because it is a page turner. So congratulations, Eric.
Thank you, Mary. It means a lot to me. I really appreciate it. Okay.
Congratulations. Thanks everyone for coming tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
so much.
Bye-bye.